Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first session of the day on Women Fighting Terror. My name is Lindsay Hilsum, and I'm very honoured to be joined by the woman who you saw in that short film, Saliha Ben Ali, and also Edith Schlaffer, who is working with Saliha in Belgium. I've just come back from Syria. I got back yesterday, so this subject of young people going to Syria to fight on behalf of the so-called Islamic State is something that's very close to my heart as well. But we're going to start with Saliha and your story, Saliha. So we've seen the outlines of it there, but when you look back, do you think that there were signs of your son becoming radicalized that you missed at the time?
Yes, when I just tried to understand what's happened with Sabri, I saw certain signs, but in this time, we were in 2013, it was just the first wave of youth people living for Syria, and we just knew something about radicalization, but not a lot. But what I saw with my son is just that he felt more and more unwell, and he felt more discriminated about.
He felt discriminated against in Belgian society.
And the way he find to answer to this feeling, it's try to coming back to his origin. Then he.
Do you mean so he became more religious?
Yes, and he tried to learn more about Islam. Mm. He went to the mosque to ask some help to the imam, and the imam told him, "You are welcome to pray, but I have no time for you to teach you more about Islam." Mm. And what's happened after that, he met some preachers.
Right.
Right, and they told him that they have time for him, that they can follow his.
So these preachers, and were these preachers the ones who began to teach him these more radical?
Yes, more
ideas?
radical ideas.
Did it worry you? Did you think something strange is happening to Sabri?
What's happened strange with Sabri is he stopped with school.
He stopped going to school?
Yes, he stopped with sport, and he broke his friendship.
So he stopped seeing his friends?
He stopped, yes, with socializing.
And then he eventually went to Syria. How did you find out he'd gone? Did he leave a note or?
No, just one morning when I went to his room, I just found his bed empty. And in this time, it's like it was clear for me. That's all my instinct told me about his changing, about his behavior. I said, no, my son left for Syria. It was clear for me.
So by then you really, you knew what was going on.
I knew it.
Could you have stopped it?
In this time? No.
You couldn't have stopped it?
No.
He was just doing his own part.
You know, he was like more and more self-confidence when he projected to go there.
So this new ideology that he adopted, it gave him a confidence.
Yes.
So then he went to Syria, and I understand that you communicated, is that right?
Yes, on Facebook.
On Facebook.
Yes.
I'm going to stop you a minute, because we're going to show one of the Facebook exchanges between Sabri and Saliha, which I think we're going to show up there. So if you just have a look at this, and you can see Saliha, come back. We're your family. What are you doing there? If you want to have contact with me, I have rules. Never again say, come back, come back. As a mother, I can't imagine what that felt like.
Yes, it was very, very hard for me to keep this link between me and him, because I think that he was not free to do and to say what he wanted to.
Yeah.
Yes, he was always with people there.
Yeah.
They always watching what he's writing on Facebook, and he's always repeat the same thing.
And then eventually, the call came to your husband.
Yes, it was one Sunday morning. My husband received a call from Syria, and he was very surprised because we were without news since 2 months.
Yeah.
And when he just answered, it was a Syrian man who asked him, "Are you the father of Ali ibn Abi Talib?" And my husband said, "I am the father of Sabri.
Yeah.
What's happened with my son?" He said, "Congratulations, your son is just failed like a martyr, like a shaheed." And that's it. And we had no more news about what's happened exactly.
So you still don't know how he was killed?
No.
But you went to try and find out, didn't you? You went to the border.
Yes, I went to the border because it was for me important to get something to try to do my grieving, you know.
For your grief, yeah.
Yes. And I went to the Syrian border on his path to try to find some answers, some feelings about what's happened with my son. I would like to talk with Syrian refugees.
Did you find any answers?
Yes, I found many answers because when my son left for Syria, the first thing that he said to me is just, "Moms, please don't be upset. I'm here because I would like to help the Syrian people. And if I did do that, who can do it?" And it was for him like a mission.
Yeah.
And when I saw these people there, these refugees, this cow there, it was very impressionant. And I say yes.
That gave you some sense of understanding. I'm going to bring Edith in here because, Edith, you work with mothers like Celia. In fact, you work together now, but you're working in Indonesia and various places. Tell us a little bit about how you're trying to help mothers like Celia.
Yes. We created the Mother School model against extremism to have a tangible approach because mothers like Saliha, they are security allies. We see more and more missiles being launched, bombs are being dropped, you know, but the trust in military hardware is fading. We need this soft, so-called soft approach, which actually is a very hard approach, catching the young before they descend.
But what are the techniques that you use? How do you do that?
What we do, and actually the women themselves came up with this request. We launched a big survey. I was very interested in the potential of mothers. So we launched a study, a big study of over 1,000 women. We traveled with our local teams across 6 countries.
Where was this?
This was in Indonesia, this was in Pakistan, this was in Kashmir, this was in Nigeria, in Zanzibar, which is at the cusp of being, radicalized now. And we asked the mothers, whom do you trust? Whom do you trust to break through the silence? Because what we hear from you, Salia, is your courage to come out, to break through the silence. It's not easy, as the mother of an ISIS fighter, to use this horrible label, to speak out and to present yourself in public. So this is courageous. But from these women, from you and many others, there are so many Salias out there we can learn, and we need to create a platform. The platform is the so-called Mother School, because these women whom we surveyed, they said in one voice, we trust each other, the closer the intimate family circle.
So they help each other?
They help each other, but we have to bring them together.
Let me stop you 1 minute, because, Celia, what gave you the courage to speak out? Because I understand what Edith is saying, that for many families, you just wouldn't want to talk about it because of your grief, because of your shame. What was it that made you feel that you can be here today?
What made me feel... What gave me this courage, it's just, I felt like a victim first. I'm not guilty about what's happened with ISIS, with this youth who left for Syria and to join this group. I'm just feeling like victim. And first, the first victim for me, it was my son, because he was manipulated from extremism in Belgium. And I think that we have to talk, we have to speak out and to give some possibilities for others, families to recognize signs of radicalization and to try to help their children before they left or before they do something wrong.
But it strikes me that finding these signs of radicalization is very difficult because your son became more religious. Well, there's nothing wrong with being religious. And he had problems that many adolescents have, don't
exactly.
they? You know,
I think educating youngsters is a tall task. You know, each and every mother who is in this situation or has been in this situation. And now we talk about, you know, the arena of violent extremism when recruiters extract your loved ones from the heart of the family. This is very hard. But again, you know, we created a tool so that women coming together in this so-called in the safe space of mother schools over a period of 10 weeks, you know, with the local mobilizers, with the testimonials, with social services, you know, with people who work in this arena. They get the self-confidence, number one, to speak, to become messengers and to become ambassadors. And number two, they get the skill set. And they don't get it, you know, like I've been to so many conferences talking about push and pull factors. I can't hear it anymore because the real push and pull factors are embedded in the knowledge of these people at the grassroots level. And they share this knowledge. And out of this knowledge, we create this skill set. And they listen differently. I think listening is the key tool to fight extremism, because the recruiters, what they give to the young who are in urge of looking for their identity and a purpose in life, they listen and they give all the trust and all the time to the young. We as mothers tend to shortcut, protect by shortcutting the discussion.
Right, so in other words, mothers aren't listening to the kids enough. Now, you're bringing this model to Europe now. Is there anything different about the approach which you need in Europe from, for example, in Nigeria or Pakistan, or is this a universal model?
No, it is not. It's shocking. The mechanisms of radicalization are unique, they are global. And I hope that the response will be the same. In Indonesia, I don't know whether you can still show the slide, we have recently trained 100 mothers, and they requested that we come for the graduation ceremony. You see, they produced these sachets, mother school, in the middle of the jungle. You know, in nowhere, 100 mothers graduated through quite a robust training scheme. Yeah. And then they, for the graduation ceremony, they were not happy just to be presented the diplomas. Yeah. They organized a peace march against extremism through the villages where they come from. 1,400 villagers cheered, men, policemen, Muslim leaders. It was
amazing. So this has had quite an impact.
So this means that we change the narrative and we change the dynamics of the conversations. We bring the conversation from the mother school meetings into the families, which absolutely changes the status and the respect the women receive in the families, and also the dynamics in the community, because now law enforcement is on our side, you know. They come and listen to the leaders of the mother school. Law enforcement, there's a huge trust gap between the families and law enforcement. But we have to win them as partners. We can't do without, you know.
Okay. Celia, before we end, if there's anybody in the audience who has a son or a daughter who they're worried about, what would be your message to them?
My message is, please try to find some help. Please speak about this. Don't stay alone in your room, or stay, maybe it will be past. Sometime, you know, my son was radicalization in 3 months only. And when I just understood what's happened, it was too late.
Celia, Ben Ali, Edith Schlaffer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The defector said he watched an emir or commander give a knife to his 8-year-old son. He made him cut off a prisoner's head, he told me. He said the son of an emir should learn early.
يعني شفتوا انتهازات قوس انتهاكات رشوة سرقة تعذيب إنه في مرة طبق عليه حكم القصاص طبعا قتلت.
So I'm now joined by 3 more panelists who are experts and who work in this field. There's Baroness Joanna Shields, who works for the government on the internet campaigns and so on. We have Sarah Khan from Inspire and Sasha Havlicek, who working on a European level. I'm actually going to start with you, Sarah. I'm interested when I looked at your biography. You have countering radical extremism and promoting women's rights as parallel tracks in your organisation. Why is that?
As an organisation, we focus on both because for us, we have to recognise that countering extremism and championing women's rights are inextricably linked. Whenever we see religious extremists come into power, one of the first things they always do, guaranteed, is that they will curtail women's rights. They will change the constitution. They will do everything they can to silence women's voices. And so women's rights actually is one of the key battlegrounds for extremists. Why is it that the Taliban will try to assassinate Malala? Why is it that Boko Haram will close down schools? Why is it that it's always to do with women? And that's because maybe extremists know better than we do that when we look at the research, all the evidence indicates time and again that when you empower women, when you educate girls, our societies are strengthened. They are more stable, and they're also less prone to extremism. And conversely, the opposite is true, that when you disempower women, when you do not give girls an education, when you pull them out from schools, those societies are also more prone to extremism. And extremists recognise that.
But Sarah, what some people would say is, you know, in many societies, they have a different attitude to women. You're being one of those dreadful creatures, the Western feminist, and we all hate her. And you're imposing your ideas on these societies, and that's the worst thing you can do.
Well, it depends how you view women's rights. I don't believe they're a cultural norm that are ascribed only for women sitting in the West. You know, you can speak to women in the Middle East, Muslim women who are every day fighting for women's rights. Organisations like Sisters in Islam who, in Malaysia, for example, they are a Muslim women's rights that campaign for gender equality, who are fighting against extremism on a day-to-day basis. So it's absolutely about equality. And even with the work that we do in our organisation with Inspire, we know it's about women's rights, absolutely. When we're challenging extremism, when we're going out into grassroots communities, the amount of abuse that we experience because of, we're challenging the ISIS narrative.
Okay, well, I'm going to come back to that. Sasha, women fighting terror, but there's a lot of women out there rather in favour of terror as well, aren't there?
Well, and I want to pick up on Sarah's point, because actually for ISIS, they understand the female factor better than we have. Women are not a sideshow. They've had a very explicit, concerted strategy to recruit women, and they've done incredibly well. So women in extremist organizations is nothing new. Women have radicalized across different ideologies since the beginning of time. But this is unprecedented in terms of the numbers of women that we're seeing going out there. Brand Caliphate, and it is a brand because they have a marketing department. They've got incredibly high tech. They've been targeting specifically women, and we've seen now of the some 7,000 or odd individuals who've gone off to fight with ISIS from Western countries. We're looking at something in the region of 550 to 700 of those being women. And I should say these are not women who join the fight because they're prohibited from fighting, but they join ISIS. And in part, it's because ISIS is so skillful in telling you this is not just about the fight. This is about building the new world order. This is about building this utopian, pure Islamic state. So don't think that you have to be on the front line. You can be an architect. You can be a doctor. Come and help us. And so in the last 6 months, the data that we have, we've got the biggest data set on women going off from Western countries to join ISIS. What we've seen is very interesting. there's been a leveling off of the number of male foreign fighters going off there, but a massive increase, continuous increase in women and in families, and women going out there, taking their families, instigating family migration out to ISIS territory.
It's extraordinary. Let me bring in Joanna here, because a lot of this is done online. This propaganda is done online, and there you are dealing with online issues for the government. Are you doing anything about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd start with the mother's perspective. We are raising the first generation of young people that are 24/7 connected to a device. This creates all sorts of problems for parents. If you think about it, you are no longer able to influence the conversations that are happening. And indeed, as Lindsay said, the internet can provide oxygen on a mass scale to this movement. It is a youth brand, ISIL. It's appealing in terms of its ideology. And what they're doing expertly is using platforms, social platforms and communication platforms on this journey to radicalization. So starting out in, radicalization always starts in general with someone you know, and then it builds to where you try to seek more information, and that's where the platforms come into play. Now, you go there and you're able to get this information and you move along this process of radicalization, and then you go into a closed network where it gets really dangerous. So you go from, nonviolent ideology, the future, a new society, all the way to this process to where the point where it's dangerous. And then you go off to an encrypted space where you have a conversation one-to-one.
But from a government point of view, what can you do about this? Because this stuff is not illegal. I mean, we have freedom of speech in this country, I hope. So, when it gets to the point where it's encrypted, then you come into GCHQ, MI5, all our security agencies looking at that stuff, which again is controversial. But before you get there, is there anything?
There's opportunities for intervention all along that trajectory of radicalization. It's really important to understand the data. The biggest contribution I think we can, and working with the technology companies is where we get this information, is, open tools that are available to advertisers today can provide incredible insight into understanding these campaigns and then how to counter those campaigns.
Sasha,
it's a data mining exercise, and it's vitally important to understand context. Context is the key. It's a surgical, understanding of how they're reaching. It's a marketing message, and it's incredibly effective.
The marketing message. Sasha, you wanted to say
I
something?
absolutely agree with Joanna. There's a spectrum, and there's a number of points of intervention. I'm not sure government is best placed to do the intervening. You can't do this without credible voices at the forefront. And what my organization's been doing is trying to build out the networks of credible voices, be they former extremists who have intimate experience. And we've got a global network of formers who've come out of extremist groups and can tell very compelling stories, be they survivors of extremism, mothers. We've just seen how compelling that can be. But those kinds of credible voices rarely have the capabilities to get their voices heard at scale. And it's a challenge of scaling. And what we've been doing is partnering now with organizations like Facebook and Google and Twitter and people in the campaign space, and saying, how do we get this message not just to all of you, because it doesn't matter if you're seeing it going viral. It matters if that individual who's really at risk of radicalization is engaging with this material. And different strategies work along the way, but just on the one-to-one piece, it's interesting. We've trialed now an initiative which takes former extremists in our network onto Facebook to engage with kids who are radicalized, who are already expressing extremely radical views. And we trialed this on kids who were in the far-right movement in the US and in the Islamist movement here in the UK. And we had over a 60% engagement rate, which means these kids are desperate for the conversation. Right now, nobody is engaging with that constituency, that grey zone. They're not illegal, except for the intel services right now, and there has to be a third voice.
But this is very interesting, because Sarah, I was talking to somebody who works in this field the other day, and she was saying part of the problem is people coming into schools, and she says it's the police and families. Well, I don't know about you, but when I was 16, the police... Well, I certainly didn't like them. And maybe the rest of you didn't misspend your youths quite as much as I did. And as for my parents, I certainly wasn't going to listen to them. So how do you deal with that? I mean, adolescents don't like authority figures.
What I would love to see more is civil society to champion this area of work. And, you know, in this country and in Europe more generally, in America, we have a very strong movement against far-right extremism. But we don't have the same when it comes to Islamist extremism, even though when we talk about Islamist extremism, we recognize it's a far-right movement. It's an us versus them narrative. It's a supremacist ideology. It promotes the dehumanization of people who aren't Muslim. It holds very anti-Semitic views and views about Muslims like me, who they'd consider to be an apostate or a heretic. We've not, as a society, recognized how damaging that ideology is. And until we do, I think things will begin to change. But there's so much work to be done then. I think part of it is because there's a sense of political correctness. Are we challenging and blaming Islam if we are standing up against Islamist extremism? Well, actually, the overwhelming majority of people who are standing out against Islamist extremism are indeed Muslims. And in fact, they are paying the price for it because they are dying in Syria, in Iraq, and in many other countries where religious extremism thrives.
But what many people would say, or some Muslims who I know would say, is, well, part of the problem is because of discrimination against Muslims, and because, you know, every time something happens, a bunch of Tory MPs get up and say, oh, the moderate Muslims are not speaking out, these moderate Muslims. And so, you know, it's like every Muslim is being blamed.
I think the issue of identity and belonging is central to all of this. The whole idea of this, that Muslims don't belong in Europe, they don't belong in the West, is a narrative that's not only pushed by Islamist extremists, but far-right extremists. And a classic example more recently is when the Hungarian Prime Minister, for example, argued with refugees coming in from Syria that this Europe is a Christian nation. We need to protect our cultural identity and values from Muslims and Islam. That is playing right into the hands of Islamist extremists who are recruiting for ISIS. And what we need to be saying, actually, is to Muslims is that you belong to Europe, you belong to Britain, and Britain and Europe belongs to you. You are an equal citizen. And if we are still not at that stage, all we're doing is feeding the groundwork and giving the narrative for ISIS and other extremists.
But, Joanna, many people would say that this government, and we had the speech by the Home Secretary Theresa May at the Tory party conference last week, were basically, you know, saying immigrants are the problem, stay away. And that fuels that narrative, doesn't it?
Well, you'll hear from the Home Secretary this afternoon about her speech and her views. I think what Sarah said is very important because it's about inclusiveness. You know, I came here in 2000 an immigrant. Now, no one's going to feel sorry for an American immigrant into Britain, but the welcoming way in which...
There's quite a lot of anti-Americanism in this country, all those guns that you have, and, you know, you're very weird over there. Do go on.
But, you know, the way I was welcomed into this society is a testament to when it works beautifully well. I mean, the fact, the opportunities that are opened. I came here as a mother with a young son on my own, and, you know, I worked my way through it, and those doors opened. And I want to make sure that those doors are open to everybody, that people feel that inclusiveness. And raising a child today, since 2000, you know, if you think about it, there's been a narrative in the media about the West being, you know, anti-Islam, and that's a problem. I mean, we absolutely have to embrace, we are all British, we are all part of this incredible country, and people have to feel connected and belong.
Yeah. I'm going to insert one thing. For the non-British people here, actually the best thing to do this happened this week, which is a headscarfed woman called Nadia Hussain, who's of Bangladeshi origin, won the Great British Bake Off.
Yeah.
And which, for those of you who don't know, is a televised cooking competition for cooking the best cake. And this is the ultimate British value. To cook a good Victoria sponge to have with your cup of tea in the afternoon. So, you know, we're getting there a little bit, aren't we?
Yeah.
Sasha, you
the issue of belonging is absolutely central, and we see that with the narrative of all of the individuals that have gone out there. I think the piece of the pie that we have ignored for way too long, however, is, I'd like to call it the pull factor as opposed to the push factors. And the pull factors are really around the ideology of this movement that has been hypercharged in a massive way by the onset of the digital era and by ISIS. But ISIS, I would just caution, is just the cherry on the cake. It has been made possible because there's been a 30-year investment into the Wahhabi Salafi ideology that underpins this.
From Saudi Arabia, with mosques being built all over the world.
It's a massive, massive investment that has been at play, that we haven't challenged at all, and we shouldn't now be surprised.
Well, the Saudis are our allies.
And what we desperately need is a soft power competition strategy with that. And that needs to be serious, and it needs to be global, and it needs to combine our aid and our diplomatic efforts in a serious way.
But part of the problem, I don't know, Sarah, you can answer this, is what people say is, what about British, and not just British, American and European foreign policy? The war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, all of these things are used as justification for radical groups.
And of course, I mean, after the London bombings, that there was the video of Mohammed Sadiq Khan, one of the bombers, and he openly stated that it's because we were invading Iraq. Again, even the narrative he used, he goes, you're bombing our people, and his people seem to be the people in Iraq rather than his own neighbours and growing up in this country. So there is an issue of ideology and identity, in my mind, where they come together at a nexus. But I agree, I think it's very important to look at issues around foreign policy. I mean, there's been so much this week about how in the UN, Saudi Arabia have now been appointed leadership of the Human Rights Council. I mean, it's remarkable, but even worse than that, the fact that our government has helped to make sure that Saudi Arabia, they've intervened to make sure that Saudi Arabia have been given that position. And so there's an issue of, if we're going to talk about challenging extremism in this country, we must be challenging it abroad. If we're going to talk about British values in this country, we should talk about making sure we spout British values in our foreign policy abroad as well.
Joanna, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sarah's absolutely right. We have to challenge extremism every opportunity. From, the faith-based groups need to be heavily involved in this. These are they can be very isolated communities, and you can still connect with the world from an isolated community, and we need to reach out. I mean, what you guys are sharing, the way in which we engage civil society is absolutely vital. The other thing I would say is that we can't do it alone. In fact, that's what the technology platforms, they have a lot of promise and potential in that, they do reach a global audience. But we need governments all around the world to be engaged in this. We need civil society around the world to be engaged in it. And we need the support of the technology companies to ensure that we can get these messages out.
Are the technology companies doing enough?
I think technology companies are beginning to do a lot. I don't think it's ever enough. When you think about it, when you connect half the world on a communications platform, it's a moral imperative or moral responsibility to help solve some of these challenges, because with all the amazing benefits that we get from being able to connect like this on a global scale in an exponential way, we also have challenges. And it's like any other medium. Yeah. It's any other medium has had to assume the responsibility of engaging with the public on issues that are around their safety. If you think about the history of broadcasting, you had public service announcements, and public service announcements were meant to share what the risks were with the public. Now, it's quite primitive in today's terms, but it's always been the tradition of the media to engage and support. And in this case, these internet platforms are the new media.
Sarah, I want to come back to individuals. And I know that you are actually dealing with people all the time. So let's take a girl. Let's think a 15-year-old girl somewhere in a school in London or Birmingham or whatever, and she's getting interested in this stuff. What do you say to her?
I think it's a very interesting one. I mean, you can't look at each person and think they're all the same, they've all got the same views. If you look at every single person who's gone over to join ISIS, each and every one of those individuals will have their own unique case. And we know that with radicalization, instruction and information, that there is no single profile. If I was speaking to young girls, which I do all the time, I would talk to them about a number of things. I would say to them, firstly, what do you understand Islam to mean as a woman? Do you believe the ISIS's vision for women, which is that girls should stop education at 15, that girls should get married at the age of 9? Is that your understanding of Islam? Or is it my understanding of Islam, where, as Muslim history has always indicated, Muslim women have always been at the forefront of society, where they were even heads of states in places like Yemen and India and in Egypt? Is that your understanding? So I would challenge that. I would talk to them about female role models. I would talk to them about what are the issues that maybe they're experiencing at home. Sometimes particularly if you come from very traditional and conservative families, if you're not being given freedom to even get on a bus to go to another part of the city, which I know some of those girls who've gone over to ISIS have, that's been the case. There's an issue around freedom there. Are they understanding the issue of women's rights and autonomy and freedom in the communities that they're growing up in? So the whole agenda and notion around gender equality within the communities that I work with, I realise is still such a pressing challenge.
And Sasha, I want to ask you a specific question. With the former extremists who you work with, both men and women, when they come back, what are the most powerful messages that they have for women like our fictional girl?
I mean, they can speak firsthand to the lies. I mean, essentially how these young people are being duped. But it isn't an overnight process, and the process of disengaging and de-radicalizing is a long-term one. And it's one that needs a great deal of support.
So it's like coming out of any cult, like people who join the Moonies or whatever.
That's right. I think what's been really interesting with the girls, and I think it's a really important piece of how we engage with these young women, is counterintuitively they see this as an empowerment. They're rejecting the Western model of sort of Sex in the City emancipation, and they're saying that this doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. I don't think it doesn't work for many of us. And what you're seeing is a kind of jihadi girl power subculture emerge. It's very violent. It's a palpable way of getting
power. It's like girl
power.
gangs in some ways.
Girl gangs. It's palpably sort of power hungry, and they talk about wanting and wishing to have the opportunity to take, real violence into their own hands. And I think we have to understand this. There's an amazing meme, one of the pieces of propaganda of ISIS, that is a fully covered young woman, and it says, "Cover girl because I'm worth it." And all of the notions of Western, they come out of a Western culture and they're subverting it in really interesting ways. And those are young women that can be engaged with because they are politically conscious, like the young men, politically conscious, engaged young people. My family's from the Balkans. I remember watching Yugoslavia turn into a genocidal catastrophe, and the anger and the kind of sense of the lack of power I felt I had at that time. And many young British Muslims were radicalized by that particular context. Yes. And the same with Syria. We need to be able to provide channels for empowerment of young people to take action in positive ways around these kinds of events.
Sasha Havlicek, Sarah Khan, Baroness Joanna Shields, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.